You've heard of using the magic loop method for knitting socks, but you're not quite sure how it works, especially when it comes to that heel flap and gusset. Well, wonder no more, because we're going to walk through every step in the sock knitting process, from casting on to knitting that heel flap and heel turn, all the way down to finishing up with the toe. So grab some sock yarn, a long circular needle, and the pattern that you'll find linked down below, and let's knit a pair of socks on Magic Loop. Hey Nerdy Knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and the goal here at Nerdy Knitting is to help you become a more confident and adventurous knitter. Sometimes that involves learning new techniques like the magic loop technique, which we're going to discuss today as we knit our way through a pair of socks. Now the socks have a rib cuff, and then the rib is carried down along the top of the sock to make it super stretchy. We'll talk about everything you need to knit these socks, but I do want to mention the pattern. You'll find it linked down below this video, so you can click on that, purchase it, and knit along with me. It comes in 6 different sizes, from a very small sock all the way up to an adult man large sock. And because of the Knit 2 Purl 2 rib, it's really stretchy, so it'll fit a lot of different foot sizes as well. Now, if you don't want to knit a whole pair of socks and you just want to practice the technique along with me, then you can still get the pattern, but instead of using sock yarn, just grab some DK or worsted weight yarn and a long circular needle that's suitable for that weight of yarn, and just cast on one sock in the very smallest size just to get an idea of how Magic Loop works. You don't even actually have to knit a whole pair of socks. You can just try the techniques, learn how to knit a sock on Magic Loop, and then use those techniques for any of your future sock knitting patterns. So let's go to the overhead and we'll take a look at what we need to knit these socks. First thing you're going to need for this pair of socks is some sock yarn, of course, and I'm using Scrumptious Purl's Stripe Me Up base in this beautiful cornflower colorway. Now this is a blend of merino and nylon, which is great for knitting socks, and a 100-gram skein or ball of sock yarn is perfect for most socks, unless you have a very, very large foot or you want to knit a really long leg. I wear a 9.5 and have a wide foot, and I can get a pair of socks as long as I don't knit the leg too long out of one 100-gram skein of yarn. We're also going to need a few stitch markers. You're going to need 1 locking stitch marker and then 2 more that you can put on the needles as you go during one stage of this sock knitting process. Then we're going to need our knitting needles. I'm using a US 1 or 2.25 millimeter, a 32-inch circular, that's an 80 centimeter circular. This is the smallest I would go for a single sock. If you want to knit socks 2 at a time, then you're going to want a 40-inch length. The 32 is a little bit too short for that. I think you could try it, but I think it would be a tight squeeze. But for a single sock, a 32-inch length is just fine. And let's take a look at this sock we're going to be working on in this tutorial. You can see it's a rib sock, a Knit 2 Purl 2 rib. We start at the cuff with our German twisted cast on, and we knit the cuff as long as we want, maintaining that stitch pattern. This is where you can make your length as long as you like or as short as you like, as long as you give it an inch or so. And then we can start on the heel flap right away on half those stitches, and you can see I'm maintaining that rib pattern right down onto the heel flap. Then we have our heel turn, and this is a square heel. In a previous tutorial we did a round heel, and we're going to try out a different heel for this tutorial. This one, you can see it's a small rectangle of fabric, so this is referred to as a square heel or a Dutch heel. Then we pick up stitches for the gusset, and we work our gusset decreases until we are back down to our stitch count. And when we do pick up those gusset stitches, you can see we're going to keep that stitch pattern, our Knit 2 Purl 2 rib, along the instep, and we're going to switch to stockinette on the foot. And you're going to do that for the length of the sock until we get down to the toe. And then we have our little toe down here to knit, and no Kitchener graft. Instead, we're going to knit until we just have a few stitches remaining, break our yarn, and loop it through those final stitches to close up the toe. So if you really dislike Kitchener graft, then this is a great little toe to add to your sock pattern collection. Now, Magic Loop is an alternative to double pointed needles. If you like double pointed needles, I have a tutorial all about using those for socks. If you really dislike double pointed needles, then Magic Loop is one of the methods you can use to knit small circumferences like socks in the round without having to use double pointed needles. What I like about Magic Loop for socks is that we are just using 2 needles instead of at least 3 for double pointed needles. And it's nice because we can divide our stitches evenly. In most sock patterns, at some point you're going to be working your instep stitches and your heel stitches separately, and it's usually divided right in half. You have your stitches are for the instep and then the other half are for the heel. And that works out really nicely when you have just 2 needles. You can put all of your instep stitches on one, all of the heel stitches on the other. And then of course it makes it easy to maintain that stitch pattern along the instep because all of those stitches are together on one needle. And the first step is of course to cast on your stitches, and we're going to use the German twisted cast on. It's very similar to the long tail cast on, and like that you're going to need a long tail of yarn. So to estimate that, I just wrap it around my needle 10 times, and then I use that to get the rest of the stitches that I need. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that is 10 stitches, so I can use that. I need to cast on 72. So that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. That should be plenty right there. So once you've measured out your length of yarn that you'll need for your cast on, you're going to put that tail yarn over your thumb, and the yarn that's attached to the ball is over your index finger. And you're going to grip them underneath. So you've got your yarn held just like this. And we're going to put, instead of a slip knot, we're just going to put our needle on top, scoop it underneath your thumb and back around. And that puts your first stitch without having to do a slip knot on there. I'll show you how to do that one more time. Hold that on top and then just scoop it down towards you under your thumb and back up and around. And there's our first stitch. And then from here, we can get into position for our German twisted cast on, and it looks very similar to the long tail cast on if you're familiar with that, but it's a little bit different, a little bit more complicated. There's a little more maneuvering, but it makes a nice stretchy cast on edge. So we're going to come towards you on this side of your thumb. You're going to go underneath both of those strands on your thumb. So you're right in between your thumb and your index finger. Then you're going to bring your needle back down between the 2 strands that are on your thumb, that loop that's there, bring it down underneath and towards yourself again. From here, we're going to go to the index finger and scoop this yarn up, or just sort of make a yarn over with your finger. That's our new stitch cast on. And then the next step is sort of to untwist that yarn that's on our thumb and go back through that loop again. And then we can tighten up that thumb yarn and repeat the process. So let's do that again. We're back in our slingshot position. We go underneath both of the strands on our thumb. We're in between right here, and now we're going to go down into that loop that's on our thumb. Back towards your body, and then all the way around to scoop this yarn like a yarn over, and then move your thumb to make that loop open up and bring that needle back through, and you can tighten up that thumb yarn. Back into position, under both strands, then back down into the loop on your thumb towards your body, yarn over with the index finger yarn, move your thumb to untwist that loop and bring that yarn through. I know it seems a bit complicated, but it does produce a very nice stretchy edge. And it's another nice alternative to the long tail cast on. It's a little more decorative on the top right there. So we're going to continue. The tail is on my thumb, working yarns on my index finger, gripped underneath, so I'm back in my slingshot position. Come underneath both of those strands, back down through the loop on my thumb, come around and make that yarn over, or scoop the yarn, whatever you want to refer to it as. Unloop that thumb yarn and then scoop it through just like that. So you're going to continue doing this until you cast on all of the stitches that you need. So once you've cast on all the stitches you need, you're going to move them down onto the middle of the cord on your needle. And then we're going to find the halfway point and divide our stitches in half. So in my case, I have a sock that is 72 stitches, so I need to divide it in half, and that would be 36. So I found that halfway point, and I'm going to pinch it there and get the cord through on either side, just like that, and slide it through so they're close to the needles like this. So you can cast on your stitches, and then you're going to divide them in half. Half on one needle and then half on the other. And at this point, I like to push both halves up onto their needle tips. Right, so I have I pushed all the stitches up on the needle, and I want to make sure things aren't twisted right here. So this is my front needle. The yarn is not attached to this one. It's attached back here. So I'm just going to turn it. All of my stitches, the cast on edge is towards the inside, and here I can see it's twisting around. So I'm going to fix those. Now it looks like everything is straight. Nothing is twisted. So we have a 2 needle setup, and the needle we're working on is our front needle, and the needle with the working yarn attached is our back needle. We're going to take the tail and the working yarn and just drape them over the back for now. This will keep them out of the way as we're getting ourselves ready. We pull out that back needle with that working yarn that's attached because we need to use it to knit, and we can't where it is right now. And then we're going to bring it towards the front so we can hold it parallel to our needle and knit with it. So now we've got loops on either side. There's our magic loop. So this is why you need at least a 32-inch needle, because you need some of this cord on either side to get your needles where you need them to be. And then from here, we're going to join to work in the round on this first stitch, and then we're going to work across the stitches right here that are on this needle. So for the first stitch, I like to use my tail and the working yarn together just for the first stitch. So I'm going to grab them. You can see they're hanging off towards the back. So I'm going to grab them, and now they are ready to be knit with. If I had left them hanging down in the front and then I brought them from behind, I would have created a reverse yarn over. So it's important to pay attention to where that yarn is on that back needle, but we'll discuss that more as we knit. But to start, just drape it over the back when you're pulling this needle out, and then you can grab it and the tail if you like. And we're going to hold these stitches, this needle, close to our back cable. We don't want a big gap right there. So we want to hold that cable close to our needle. I sort of pinch it with my finger back here along with my yarn, and I'm going to insert and knit this first stitch. And I want it to keep it close because I don't want a gap right there. So get in there, grab that yarn, and I'm going to tug it close so we don't get a gap. And then from here I can drop the tail. I'm actually going to pull it through so it's not with this working yarn. There, and then I can continue working across these stitches. Now I'm doing a knit 2, purl 2 here, so I've got to knit 1 more stitch, and then I've got to purl 2 stitches and continue doing that across right here. So this is the magic loop method. You're just dividing your stitches, and then you have to set things up and pull this needle out and work across. So I'm going to continue working in knit 2, purl 2 across this set of stitches, and then we'll come back and get readjusted to knit across the other half of these stitches. There, I finished with this needle. So I can drop the empty needle. It's not going to go anywhere. Pull these up a little bit. I want to leave them on the needle for now. Then I'm going to pull on the cord for the back needle and get those stitches in the back up onto their needle so we can knit across them. And then we have to turn our work, because now this needle is our working needle, and the working yarn is attached to that last stitch on our new back needle. So we push these stitches up, and we want to check to make sure we're not twisted on this first round, and then we can knit across these stitches. Okay, so my stitches are all here. They look a little odd right now, so I'm just going to make sure nothing is twisted. There's my beginning of round over here. Everything looks good there. Everything looks good there. You can see there is going to be a gap. Whenever you have where the needles join on, whether it's double pointed, magic loop, or any other method, you're going to have a gap there. So we do want to pay attention to that as we're knitting. Our working yarn, it's not hanging here in the front. We're going to bring it up and drape it over that back needle to get it out of the way. And then we can pull out this back needle. So this is always your configuration when you're starting a new round. The yarn, working yarn's attached to the last stitch you worked on your back needle. And these are the stitches you need to knit across. So we pull out this back needle and get that needle moved so we can use it to knit. We've got our 2 loops on either side. We can grab our yarn at this point. So if I wanted to use my right hand, I could grab it from the back. And now it's ready to knit. And we want to continue in that knit 2, purl 2 pattern, but we want to make sure we don't end up with a gap here. So if you can, use your finger to pinch the cord close to this needle tip. Now you don't want to really yank on this last stitch because it's going to make it too tight, and it'll end up sized for the cord and not for your needle tip, and you'll have a hard time pushing your stitches up onto the needle, especially where that join is, because that stitch will be too tight. So don't really yank on it. You just want to keep the needle tip and the cord close together as you're working that first stitch. I know it can feel a little weird having to pinch all that together, but so make that first stitch. I'm not making it super tight, but I'm trying to keep it close to that cord. And knit 2, purl 2, so I've got to knit my next stitch, and then I'm going to finish knitting and purling across this row. Finished with this, I can drop that needle, adjust these stitches, and then we're going to pull on that cord, move our work, and we can put these stitches up on the needle. And this is our last check to make sure there's nothing twisted, because we could untwist it at this point if we wanted to. Okay, everything looks good. All of my stitches joined in the round, nothing looks twisted. Now, of course, my first stitch on my front needle has 2 stitches coming out of it. I'm going to knit them together because that was where I used the tail to close up this gap. And I can pull on it right there, you can see, and that helps close it up. So before we pull our needle out, I want to take this working yarn, which is on our back needle, drape it over the back. But let me show you why. If I leave it here and I pull this out and I start knitting, I reach around to grab that yarn and start knitting. You can see what I've done. I've created a yarn over, basically, right here. So I like to make sure the yarn is in the position where I want it before I pull that needle out, so I don't create this yarn over. Now, it's not a huge deal. If I were to start knitting and I had that yarn over, sort of that reverse yarn over right there, you can see it's right there. All I'd have, when I come back around, I would see it. I would obviously see there's this weird loop on my needle. Looks like a yarn over. I didn't mean to do that. I could just drop it off the needle. It's not that big a deal. It might cause a bit of excess yarn in that spot from dropping it off the needle, but you can use a tapestry needle and pull the excess to the stitches on either side. I don't even usually do that. I don't notice that happening very much. I mean, I very often do end up with that little yarn over, but it happens because you pull that yarn, working yarn, up and over, and it's wrapping itself around that cord when you're making your stitch on the front. So that's just something to be aware of. So that's why I like to move that yarn out of the way before I start. So I'm going to put my stitches back up on the needle here. Be careful when you're doing that too. I've had circumstances where I've shoved the stitches and all the stitches came off my needle because I was shoving a little too hard. This is also why when you are doing that first stitch at the beginning of the round, if you have pulled it too much to try to close up this gap, you're gonna have a hard time pushing it up onto the needle because you'll have sized the stitch on the cord and you've tightened it up, so it's hard to move up here. And that's another common thing to do, and then you're trying to shove your stitches up, but because they're very tight right there. So be careful about that join. You want to close the gap, but you also don't want to make that stitch so tight that it's really hard to move it up onto your needles. So I'm back in my position. My tail of yarn is right here. For now, I'm going to use that to mark my beginning of round. And my working yarn is attached to this back needle, so I'm going to take that, drape it over the back, Now I can pull out my needle from the back, bring it to the front. So now I'm in position to knit. Now I can grab that yarn. I can hold it in my right hand. There's no weird yarn over there. If you're worried about that little gap, use the tail to close it up. But I'm going to hold the yarn in my left hand, and we've established our knit 2, purl 2 pattern. So if you did like me and you used the tail here as well, remember that this first stitch, it's got 2 heads coming out of this one stitch, but I'm going to work them as one stitch, and I'm going to hold this close with either finger. Try both to see which is easiest for you. You want to pinch that cord close to your needle tip so you can avoid any gaps right there. And I am tightening up a little bit on this stitch, but not too much, because I don't want to tighten up too much on this stitch back here. So there's my first stitch, knit 2. Now I've got 2 purl stitches. So you've got your pattern established. Let's knit these stitches, and we'll come back and get set up one more time so you can make sure you know how to do your magic loop setup. But that's all there is right now. We're just going to knit 2, purl 2 around until the cuff and the leg of the sock are as long as you want them. Coming to the end of my round, so I can drop my now empty needle, grab my cord and slide those new stitches up, turn my work. So now the working yarn's attached to what I just finished. I can put these stitches up on my needle and finish this second round. So I pull back needle out. Before I do that though, or if you've forgotten to, you can bring the needle underneath the yarn so we can get that yarn up and out of the way. So I brought my needle around. All my stitches are ready to be knit. Push them up onto the needle tip. Grab your yarn. It's not making a yarn over around there. You can check that at this point. Pinch it together with your needle tip to close up any potential gaps right there. Knit together. Tighten up just a little to avoid that gap. And then continue your pattern across this needle. So that is the end of round 2. At this point, if you wanted to place a marker for the beginning of round, you could do that as well. So pull on that back cord, turn your work. So the working yarn is on the back needle, stitches to be worked are on the front needle. You can push them up onto the cord. Now you can use your tail as a reminder for the beginning of round, or you can't really put a stitch marker on the needle because every time you come back it's going to fall off, but you could attach a locking stitch marker right here on this first stitch if you wanted to mark that beginning of round. But the tail works just fine to mark that. So I'm checking, making sure everything is situated the way I want. My stitches look good. I can take that working yarn, drape it over the top, pull out that back needle, bring it to the front. I've got some cord on either side. Take my yarn from the back. Make sure I'm not having some odd yarn over thing going on right here. And then I can continue working in the round. So you're going to want to continue in this manner, following that knit 2, purl 2 pattern until the cuff and the leg, both of them, because we're continuing the pattern all the way right down the sock. You're just going to continue in that knit 2, purl 2 pattern until it's the desired length. I think I did a couple of inches here. 24 rounds. I think I did 24 rounds. Personally, I like a shorty sock, but a little bit taller than a shorty, so that's what I like. But you can knit this as long as you want or as short as you want. You do want probably at least an inch before we start the heel flap, just so it doesn't end up falling off your foot later on. But you're just going to continue working in knit 2, purl 2 rib until the cuff and the leg of the sock are as long as you want, and then we'll come back and we'll start our heel flap. So just continue practicing your magic loop method. The only thing to do is to get into that position. You pull your needles together, Your working yarn's attached to the back needle. The stitches you need to work are in the front, and drape that yarn over the back needle, pull that needle out, bring it to the front so you can start working, and then grab that yarn to start working, and that will keep it from wrapping around the needle. I've done that so many times. It's a very common issue, but if you happen to do that and you end up with that odd yarn over right there, then you can just drop it off the needle. So you're just going to continue working in knit 2 purl 2 rib in this magic loop method until you're ready to start the heel flap, and I'll see you back here for that part next. So I finished the leg and the cuff of my sock. I like short socks, so that's why it's this short. But of course you can continue and knit the leg as long as you want it to be. Just continue knitting in the knit 2 purl 2 rib. If you're wondering about the markers, I just use those to mark the rows. Every 10 rows I put in a marker so I can keep track of how many rounds I've completed. So my second sock will match my first sock. So as you're knitting the first one, keep track of those rounds and write it down so you'll know how long it should be, and how long your second sock should be when you get to it. But we're ready now to move on to this part of the sock, the heel flap. And we want to continue this knit 2 purl 2 pattern, but we need to center it over the heel flap. So we're going to do a little bit of a setup right here. So I want you to get set up in your magic loop. My yarn is back there. My stitches are on this needle that I need to work. I've pulled out that back needle, so I'm ready to go. You can grab that yarn. You can see I leave it laying over the top. As the sock gets longer, you'll start to get a feel for that and where that yarn should be, just to keep it out of the way as you're getting set up. So once you're ready, you're going to just do this 3 first stitches. I want you to knit 2 and purl 1. And that is it. And now we are going to readjust our stitches from this point. So I'm going to pull these all up onto the needle. And this is sort of our new beginning of round. You're going to use the same number of stitches. In my case, my whole sock is 72 stitches, so I'm going to use the first 36 stitches, not counting those 3 I just worked. That's just so we can center our heel flap. So I'm going to start counting from this other purl 1 until I have 36 stitches. So my 36 stitch point is right there. That's half of my stitches, and it should be between right in the middle of a purl 2, because we're going to separate them and have a purl 1 on either side. So now we're all set up. That centers our stitch pattern. We are starting and ending with a purl 1. That purl 1 is going to turn into our slip stitch edge, and it centers our knit 2 purl 2 rib. We're going to end and begin with a knit 2. So our pattern is centered. It would look very odd if we started with a knit 2 over here and then ended with a purl 2. It just wouldn't look very nice. We want that pattern to be centered on the back of the heel. So we need to adjust our stitches to allow for that. And whatever size you're knitting, follow along in the pattern. It will tell you. You're going to do that exact same thing. You're going to knit those first 2 stitches and then purl 1 stitch, and that gets us set up. We're just slightly moving our beginning of round so we can center those stitches. So now we can get our stitches back on the needle, and we're working on just this half right here. We're not going to be working on our instep stitches. We're going to be working back and forth in rows for a while to create this heel flap, this square of fabric that sits on the back of your heel. And I really like to do this in a rib pattern because it really pulls in and it fits nicely. The rib will stretch and it will fit to accommodate around your heel. So I have the stitches up on the needle. The yarn is back there. I'm going to pull this needle out, and we're just going to work back and forth on these stitches right here. So the first thing we're going to do is slip this first stitch. The yarn's in the back. I'm going to slip it purlwise. I'm inserting my needle just as if I were going to purl, but I'm not purling the stitch. I'm just going to slip it to the other needle. And that gives us that edge that we can use to pick up our gusset stitches later. Then we're just going to follow the pattern we have set. We have a knit 2 purl 2 pattern. We want to maintain that. And my first 2 stitches are knit 2, so I'm going to knit them. and I'm going to purl 2 and just continue this until the last few stitches, following the knit 2, purl 2 pattern that you've already established on the leg of the sock. And I'm getting to the end of this row, so there's my last purl 2, and now I have a few stitches left. We're finishing with that knit 2 to balance the edges, and we're just going to knit this last stitch. It is a purl stitch to this point, but we're going to use it to pick up our edge, our gusset stitches later. So now we're just going to ignore that. We're going to turn it into a knit stitch. So knit that last stitch. And then we're not knitting in the round. We're going to turn our work and we're going to knit back in the other direction. We're not setting up for magic loop at this point. We are just knitting flat back and forth on these stitches right here. So for the wrong side rows of the heel flap, you're just going to, again, follow the pattern, but you have to slip this first stitch. So we're slipping it purlwise, just like we did on the previous row. But this time the yarn is held towards us. We're holding it in the front towards you. Slip that stitch. And then we can see our first 2 stitches here are purl stitches. So we're going to knit those 2. We're going to purl those 2. We want to stay in the pattern that we've established. So purl 2 stitches. And then we have a knit 2. So I'm going to knit those 2. And then continue maintaining that knit 2, purl 2 rib all the way to the end. And I'm on the last few stitches here, my final knit 2. And then I have my purl 2 and my edge stitch, which I want to be a knit stitch, and it has to be slipped on every other row. But we're going to, on this round or this row, we purl it. We've purled our last 2 and we're going to purl this stitch. All of this is spelled out right in the pattern. You'll find it linked down below. Then we turn our work. That's 2 rows of our heel flap complete. So let's go over that one more time. So our right side row, we're maintaining our pattern, but we want to work these last 2 stitches as knit stitches, but we're going to slip them as we on the first, we're going to slip the first time and then we'll purl it when we come back to it. So on this right side row, we have the yarn in our back and we slip that stitch purlwise, and then we just follow this stitch pattern that we have set. We can see we have 2 knits. Now we have 2 purls, and you just follow that pattern, and we're at the end of this right side row, our final knit 2, and then we're going to knit that last stitch as well. Then we turn and we're going to work a wrong side row. So we're not really doing magic loop at this point. We're just knitting flat back and forth on these stitches right here. So our wrong side rows, we have the yarn towards us, slip that first stitch, and our first 2 stitches here are purl stitches. So we're going to purl them. And then knit the next 2. And just continue working that established knit 2, purl 2 pattern to the end of the row. All right, we're reaching the end of this row, our final knit 2, purl 2, and we're also going to purl this last stitch. So what's going on here is our heel flap is slowly getting longer. This part we're knitting right here. And your pattern will direct you for how many rows you need to knit. I have to repeat these 2 rows quite a few more times. I think I need 36 rows altogether. So I'm going to repeat that 17, 16 more times, I think. So it's just a 2-row repeat. You're just knitting and purling to establish that pattern. And these stitches on the end are going to be worked in stockinette stitch. So, and slipping them every 2 rows. And that just makes it easier to pick up the stitches later on for the gusset. If you look right there, you can see we have these knit stitches right along the edge. And when you slip them, you elongate them. So you'll have 1 stitch on the edge for every actual 2 rows that you've knit. And those will sort of guide you as you pick up your stitches for the gusset, because you'll be using each of these stitches as a guide. When you see 1 stitch, you're going to pick up a stitch for your gusset. So I also use them to count my heel flap stitches. I know how many rows I have to do. I have to have 36 rows altogether. That means I'm going to have 18 of these stitches on this side. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next part, which is our heel turn. And in this sock, it is a little square heel turn. You can see it's a little rectangular piece of fabric. This is called a square heel or a Dutch heel, and basically it's done by taking our heel flap stitches, dividing them into 3 more or less depending on the stitch count. The center third stays, you just work them back and forth, and the stitches to either side are the stitches that end up being decreased. So you end up with this little square of fabric, and that's where the decreases are worked, right along this edge right here. So let's get going with how to do that. So of course you would follow the pattern for the stitch count and the number of stitches in the heel for your sock size. And we start by slipping that first stitch. And in my case, I'm going to knit 22. And at this point, we are also switching to stockinette stitch along the heel and the foot. So no more rib pattern from this point on for the bottom of the foot. Okay, so I have knit across the first 2/3, more or less. And at this point, this is where we start our short rows. So if you are new to short rows, this is a good time to make sure you're in a quiet space so you can pay attention to what you're doing and you don't lose your place. Now, all a short row here in this case is just mean we're going to stop early. We're not finishing the row. We're stopping short of the end of the row. We're going to do something to right here, and then we're going to turn and continue back in the other direction. But it's not hard to do. It's just something you have to pay attention to. So I've knit all the stitches I need to. My next step is to knit an SSK. So we're just going to decrease a stitch right here. And then I turn my work. I'm done with this side. There are still stitches I haven't worked, but that's perfectly fine. We turn and we're going to work back in the other direction, but we're not going to go all the way. We're going to start our short rows on this side as well. So we slip here, that stitch, our decrease stitch, and we are going to purl back in the other direction. In my case, I have to purl 10 stitches. Okay, and I'm at the point I need to be, and now it's time to work my other short row. In this side, we're going to work a purl 2 together. And that's the last thing we do here, and then your directions will tell you just to turn. We're not going to work these stitches. Like I said, a short row just means we are stopping short of finishing the whole row. And then we will work in the other direction. And what we're slowly going to be doing on either side of these gaps what we're forming, we're going to be decreasing these stitches away, and we'll just have these stitches left. So for row 3, I slip one again, and then I knit to 1 stitch before that gap. Where I worked my last short row, you'll see that there is a gap there. So I'm going to work to that gap, leaving 1 stitch before it. You can see it coming up right there. Now this is where it's easy to, if you're watching TV or you're distracted, to knit right past that. We don't want to do that. We want to stop right here. So we have a stitch before the gap and we have a stitch after the gap, and those are the 2 stitches we're going to decrease together, and we're going to do an SSK. So we slip the one before the gap and we slip the one after the gap, and then we knit them together through the back legs. And that is another stitch decreased from this side of our heel turn. Then we can turn and we can do the wrong side row. So on this side, we're slipping that first stitch. This time the yarn is held towards us, just like we were doing the heel flap, and we're going to purl to 1 stitch before that gap. And there we are. We can see the gap right there. So we're going to work our decrease on this side. We purl these 2 stitches together, the stitch before the gap and the stitch after the gap. Then we stop and we turn our work. That's all there is to this heel flap. You're just going to keep working back and forth. You're knitting in stockinette, slipping the first stitch as you go, decreasing when you come to that gap, 1 stitch from either side. So just continue doing this until you have used up, you've decreased all of these stitches on either side of the gap. Your last row will be a wrong side row. Coming up to my last two stitches, one stitch on either side. So let's work across these heel stitches and get that final short row decrease on the right side of the work. There's my final one. I'm going to decrease and get rid of that final stitch. So I should be left with just the stitches from the center of the heel. I've got one more to do over here. And purling those last two together, and I have finished with that heel turn. And at this point, this is what our needles look like. Our instep stitches are still hanging out right here, and we have just magically created the turn on our sock. So you can see we had a tube and we created that flap, and then we do this little bit right here, and our sock can now start going in a different direction. And we've set up for that. So now we're going to move on and work on picking up all of the stitches and getting our instep stitches going again, so we can work the gusset, this part right here, and we'll get all of our stitches and we'll be working in the round again. Okay, so we're going to need our markers at this point, because this is where it gets a little bit interesting and a lot different than what you see with double pointed needles. So at this point, we've finished a wrong side row. We're back on the right side of our work, and we're going to start by knitting across our heel stitches. So we set up, we're not really in magic loop. We've still been working back and forth flat. So we're going to continue that here. So we knit across our heel stitches, and we're going to pick up the gusset stitches on the first side. Okay, so you do want to pay attention to how many heel stitches you have, because as you're picking up, you've got to count to see how many stitches you pick up here. So I know I've got 10 stitches already, or 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. I have 12 stitches in my heel, and along this gusset, I have to pick up 18 stitches plus one extra. I like to pick up an extra in the corner to close up any potential hole. That's what I've done on this sock, and I think it closes up that gap really nicely. Sometimes you still end up with a little bit of a hole on one side. I do have a little bit right there. But in that case, I can later on take a tapestry needle and try to work some of the yarn, because it's just sort of where it gaps open. So you can sort of tighten up those stitches by moving some of the yarn to either side, but very, very carefully. But it's not that terribly bad on that side, so I'm not too concerned. So you'll look at your pattern and pick up the amount of gusset stitches you need. In my case, I need to pick up 18 plus an extra, so 19. Plus I need to know I still have my 12 heel stitches as well. So to pick those up, we use those slipped stitches as our guide. You can see them right there. The little V's along the edge right here. Those are the slipped stitches. And we're going to pick up under both legs, just like that, to make a nice sturdy join. I don't like to pick up just the one leg. I think it ends up looking a bit sloppy and loose. I like to get both. So we're going to use the needle that we've just, that have our heel stitches. So we're just going to sort of turn it. And then I just slide them up on the cord to make it a little bit easier at this point. And look for that first stitch right up here along the edge. You can see the decrease stitch right there. That's not the one I want. I want to come up here. And the first few can be a bit tricky. That's the decrease. Right here would be the first one. Let's see how that looks. And if I don't like it, then I can, of course, take it off and do it again. And it does look like, let me see, right there. There we go. We've got both legs. Nope, I don't. Let me try that again. All right, right here. There we go. There's our slipped stitch. So we wrap our yarn as if to knit and we bring it under both those legs. And there's no reason that you have to keep it. If you don't like that spot and you want to pick up somewhere else, then you can go ahead. That looks like it's all right, I think. So I'm just going to proceed from there. There's my first one. And I'm just going to pick up 18 more using these slipped stitches as my guide. There is number 18. Count and make sure. Then I want to pick up one more. It's not really a slipped stitch at this point, but just some sort of spot that's not going to leave a hole, and it's going to close up any gaps right here. So I don't really like to pick up this bar right there because I feel like that does leave a gap. So I sort of try to pick up off to the side that little stitch right there. I think that will work. And if I wanted to, I could also pick up the bar and on the next round knit those two together and close that up. But I would want to twist that bar so it's going to stay closed, sort of like a make one. Okay, so I picked up my first gusset stitches. At this point, you need to place a marker because we want to separate our instep from that gusset, and we also want to know where we have to work our decreases. So, and then also we've got a lot going on here, so we have to adjust our stitches, and we're back to knitting in the round. So I'm going to pull all of those down, and I'm going to pull my instep stitches up onto their needle. And this is where if you've got markers, they can end up falling off. So I'm just going to slide it back on there, pull this one out, put these stitches on the needle. And we want to maintain our pattern across the instep. Ignore the markers. Those are, I was just using them to count to make sure I had enough in my cuff. I just haven't taken them off. And we're going to maintain our pattern along the instep. But we want to pay attention. We have a purl stitch here at the beginning, and then in your knit 2, purl 2 all the way to the end, and a final knit 2, and then another purl 1 at the end. So pay attention to that. We're going to maintain those purl 1s on the side. You can see right there, that's that final purl 1. You can't really tell it's not 2 stitches in there. Look, it just keeps the look of the knit 2, purl 2 rib going right to the gusset. So you're just, now it's not written in the pattern, knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2. I just tell you to maintain the pattern because you can see the pattern's already established. We have knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, except for those right at the edge. You want to make sure you're purling that stitch. So bring that yarn to the front, slide those stitches up. And I do like to work this one firmly. If you have to, pull this out a little more so you have more cord to work with on this side. And purl this stitch, and I do like to pull that one more firmly. I want to close up any gap I can have right there. So I'm going to hold that firmly, knit this first stitch, and then go back to my normal tension. And now that marker is just going to flop around on there. We're leaving it for now. You'll see later why it's there. And work in pattern across the instep. We want to keep this knit 2, purl 2 pattern on the top of our sock. Coming to the end of my instep stitches, so final knit 2, and then I'm going to purl 1. Okay, and now we're going to sort of slide them up. We're going to use this same needle to pick up the gusset stitches along this edge. So if it's hard to turn it, then you can slide them up on the cord and then use it, or you can use this needle as well to pick up the stitches if that's easier, but I just sort of drop that one and move these up on the cord. We've got the marker there, so if we pull it all the way up, that's fine too. Whatever it takes so to make it easy for you to pick up your gusset stitches. So I'm going to pick up my 18 plus 1 along this edge, and of course I want to start right up in this corner. I'm actually not starting with a slipped stitch and they're moving in this direction along this side. I'm going to start above that for my extra stitch. Right here, I think. Oh, I had that going in the wrong direction. They're going this way. You can see right there. There's that little purl from our cuff, and then they move in that direction. I was looking at them upside down. So I'm going to, there's my first slipped one here. It's upside down. If I'm looking at it this way, the V, it's more like an A. But I want to pick up above that somewhere. I'm going to try right here under both legs of, nope, that's going to leave a hole. If I pick that up, I can see there's going to be a really big hole right there. I don't want to pick up there. Maybe off to the side of that, right here. Nope, that's still leaving a hole. Get this marker out of the way. Now this is where you can take your time and make sure you pick up in a good spot so you don't end up with a gap right there. So there's my first slip stitch. I don't want to pick up there. So let me maybe right here, this stitch off to the side of it. That little leg of the stitch and this leg right here. Still a bit of a hole. Let me see how it looks when I pick up the yarn and put it through. Because nothing says I have to keep this one. If I put it on there and I don't like it, I can pull it right back off again too. Okay, I don't think that's going to make a hole. That looks good. So I'm going to keep that as my extra stitch, and now I can pick up 18 more. So I do want to keep it firm. Let's see if I can find that extra one. The cord starts to get in the way right here, but we just work around it. There we go. There is my first pickup stitch. So I've got 18 more to go. So I'm just going to pick up the stitches right along this edge. Then we'll come back and get ourselves ready to start working our gusset and working in the round again. Okay, there is my last one right there in the corner. So I picked up all of my gusset stitches on this side, and you know what I forgot? I was supposed to put a marker here. So this is a good time if you have locking stitch markers to use them there. So I'm just going to slide it right onto the cord right here between the instep stitches and the gusset stitches that I just picked up. There. Okay, so we picked up all of our stitches, and we need to get to our beginning of round, which is now going to be the bottom of the foot right here. So I'm going to move the, I'm not really picking, I'm just going to pick a spot randomly because we're going to stop and adjust in a second here. So just to get in the magic loop position again, because we're going to start knitting in the round, we want to get all of these stitches up here. These are the stitches we have to work, so we're putting them up on the needle. And this is the needle we need. So our yarn is draped over the back, and we're pulling our needle out, and we're going to knit halfway. So whatever your heel stitches, my heel stitches are right here. These 12 I'm going to knit halfway. So I'm just going to knit 6 of these. And this will close up this little gap right here. So try to knit this one a little tightly, and I'm pulling on that yarn to give it some good tension in any potential hole. And I am giving that a tug right there. One, I'm going to knit a few more. There, that's the halfway point for my heel. So I'm going to put all of this on the needle now. Everything is up here. And this is our new beginning of round, the bottom of the heel. So I'm going to put a locking stitch marker right on my heel right here, so I know that this is my beginning of round. Okay, so this is what our sock looks like at this point. All of our stitches are on here. You're going to have more than your original stitch count because of those stitches we picked up for the gusset, but that's where we're going to decrease them away. We're at the center of our round here. We knit up to the marker, and we're working a decrease at this point, a few stitches before. And then we slip the marker, we knit in pattern, maintaining that knit 2, purl 2, rib with a little purl 1 on either end, slip the marker, work a decrease here, and then work back to the beginning of the round. And then we alternate that with just a plain round where we knit to the marker, work our pattern, knit to the marker, or knit after the marker back to the beginning of round. And those decreases are worked right here along the edge to get rid of all of those extra stitches, and we'll alternate that with that plain knit round until we're back to our stitch count that we need. So to set up for magic loop, this is where it gets a little interesting because the beginning of a round is down here. We want to just basically divide our sock in half. So you're going to look at your instep stitches and divide it in half, and in my case I have 36 stitches here, so I want to find the center point, which is 18 stitches. Right here in the center. So I'm dividing between 2 knits, which is nice because I do like to start and end, or start a round in magic loop with a knit instead of a purl. So this is how our sock looks right now on magic loop. Of course, if you prefer, you could start this next round, work up to here, and then you could divide for magic loop and put all of your instep stitches on one needle and all of the gusset and heel on the other. This is personal preference. I just prefer to use the beginning of round as my point for the beginning of round for switching between the 2 needles on magic loop. But you can change that if you want. You'll just have to pay attention to where the real beginning of round is compared to where your needles are. But we're only going to do this for the width of the gusset, and once those stitches are decreased, we're going to change this configuration again. So I'm getting my magic loop set up. These are the stitches I need to work, so I'm putting them up on the needle. My yarn's hanging over the back, and I'm going to pull this needle out, so I've got some cord on either side to work with. And let's work our first gusset decrease. So you get your yarn, and we're just going to knit to 3 stitches before this marker here. And of course, we like to pinch our cord close to our needle so we can avoid any gaps right there where those joins are, but not too tightly because then it makes it too difficult to move those stitches up onto the needle. Right, we're ready for our first gusset decrease. I'm 3 stitches before that marker, so I'm going to work a knit 2 together, knit 1, slip that marker, and then our instep pattern, we're maintaining the pattern, and my first stitch is a purl stitch, so I'm going to purl, and then I can knit 2, purl 2 across, coming to the end, and our final knit 1, because that's where we divided for our socks. So we can push these up onto the needle, pull the cord, turn our work, working yarn straight over that back needle, push the stitches up onto the needle that we're going to be working, these stitches in the front that are facing us, pull out that back needle, bring it around so we can work with it. And our first stitch here is a knit, but pull that cord close so you can avoid any gaps right there. Work that a little more firmly, and then we've got a purl 2 right here at the beginning. So maintain that pattern to the stitch marker. Work my last purl 1, slip that marker, and we've got our decrease here. We're going to knit 1 and then work an SSK. And then just knit to the end of the round. And we are back at the beginning of our round. We can readjust from magic loop to work the next part. So on this next round, I'm not going to demonstrate it for you, but we'll just discuss it quickly. We are going to knit to this marker, slip the marker, maintain the stitch pattern across the instep stitches, our knit 2, purl 2, rib, slip the marker, and then knit to the end of the round. And you'll just continue to alternate. The round after that, you'll knit to 3 stitches before, work your decrease, work across the instep stitches in pattern, slip this marker, work a decrease here, and knit to the end of the round, and alternate those 2 rounds until you are back down to your original stitch count. So once you've finished all of your gusset decreases, you're back down to your original stitch count. I am back down to my stitch count. I started with 72 and I now have 72, 36 for my instep and then 18 on each of these sides. So we're going to adjust our beginning of round and get back over on this side where our yarn tail is. So to do that, we need to knit across these stitches. So get yourself set up for magic loop again. We can remove this marker because this is no longer the beginning of round. So knit to the first marker. We can now remove this marker, but we're going to maintain our stitch pattern still. So there's a purl 1 right there, and then knit 2, purl 2 across to the last stitch, which is a knit 1 in my case. So you'll follow your instep pattern that you've already established. Doesn't really matter where you've divided at this point. On the instep, you're just going to keep maintaining that pattern. Okay, so we finished the first half. We're going to turn our work. Get these stitches up on the needle. Yarn's hanging over the back. Pull out that back needle so we can use it to make sure we have enough cord on either side. So we're going to work to this marker and we're going to stop right there. My last few stitches, my purl 1. Now I can remove this marker and we're going to put everything on the needles at this point, or on the cord. Okay, because we are finished with our gusset, so we can now adjust back to our original position of putting all of the instep stitches on one needle and all of the heel stitches on the other. So you're going to divide. I have 72, so I'll divide in half, 36 and 36, but I can also just find that single purl stitch. I know that's the end of the instep stitches right there. So I'll pull that cord out. And now we are divided to work the foot. And if you're feeling a little bit confused about where you are, if you look, your yarn tail will be right here on that side. So you can use that as your guide, or you can also place a marker here telling you that this is now the beginning of the round. We're back to our original spot. Well, we adjusted a few so we could fix our stitch pattern, but we are good right there. You could double check your stitches, make sure you have the stitch count you need. So at this point, you are just going to continue knitting for the length of the foot. Get these on here so we can see what we're doing. There we go. So you're set up now to continue working the foot. All of the heel or the bottom of the foot stitches are on one needle. So you're just going to knit across these stitches. Then when you turn and work on the instep, you're going to maintain that knit 2, purl 2 pattern, beginning and ending with that little purl 1 just along the side. And maintain that stitch pattern until the sock is the desired length. And of course we still have our toe to complete, so you don't want to knit this too long. You want to use a ruler or a sock ruler and keep an eye on how long your sock needs to be for the foot that you're knitting for. The pattern will tell you how long the sock should be when you should stop, so you can start working on the toe. Once you've finished your sock to its desired length, it's time to move on to the toe. And for the first round of the toe, we are going to simply knit. And that's because we need to establish stockinette stitch for the whole toe. We're going to stop working in our knit 2, purl 2 rib right here. But I want to show you what happens if you accidentally create a yarn over here on the edge. I like to keep that yarn draped to the back, like I've said many times when I'm doing magic loop. But what if it's underneath and you grab it from behind and pull it over? You can see right there, I've created a loop. I'm going to leave it there so you can see what that looks like when we come back to this beginning of round. So we've moved on to the toe. We're going to knit this whole round. No more knit 2, purl 2, rib. So do that and meet me back here and we will continue on working our toe. Coming to the end of this round, and you can see I have stopped working knit 2, purl 2, rib. We're just knitting across now. And here's my last stitch, this purl one, which I'm going to knit. And now I can see I've got this odd thing right here. That's not a stitch. It's just where I carried the yarn over the cord when I was starting the beginning of the round for Magic Loop. I can just take my needle out. There's nothing that, you don't have to keep that. You don't have to decrease it away. Just take your needle out. Now it might leave a bit of a longer float here. I find as I continue working that disappears. But if you notice that that's still noticeable after you've worked a few more rounds, you can take the tip of your needle and work that excess yarn to the stitches to either side. But I don't think you'll even notice it. But that's what happens. Sometimes you just wrap that yarn around the needle the wrong way and you end up with this, looks like a yarn over right on the edge. It's not another stitch, so don't knit it. Just drop it off the needle and continue going. So we're going to drop our yarn over the back so that doesn't happen. Get ourselves set up for Magic Loop. Get these stitches up on the needle. Pull this one out. And now we're going to start our toe decreases. And we're going to start just like what if you've ever done socks before, it's going to look like a normal toe. We're going to knit 1, SSK, then we're going to knit to the end of this needle until we have 3 stitches left over here. And right here I've got my 3 stitches remaining, so I'm going to knit 2 together and knit 1. Then I turn my work and get set to do the other half of the sock. So turn, get these stitches up on the needle, pull this needle out, my yarn is back here, and then we're going to repeat that same process across this sock. Knit 1, SSK, I'm going to knit to the last 3 stitches on this needle and repeat that, knit 2 together, knit 1. I reach the end of needle 2, so now it's knit 2 together, and then knit that final stitch, and that is what a decrease round looks like. And we're going to work a specific sequence of those decrease rounds with plain knit rounds to get a round toe. So this toe uses that decrease, but then we're going to work it in a, sort of a very quick succession to create this toe shape. And there is no grafting at the end. We're going to work right down into the last few stitches. So that was our first round, our decrease round. Now we're going to knit 3 rounds, and then you repeat that decrease round, and then you knit 2 rounds, and then you repeat that decrease round again. Then you knit 1 round, and then you just continue repeating that decrease round until you have 8 stitches left. All of this is spelled out in the pattern that creates this toe shape. This is probably one of my favorites. I think it fits very nicely. Looks a bit pointy here, but it looks really great when it's on your foot. But that is how this toe is worked. Like many other sock patterns, the decreases are worked fairly similarly with your SSK here, and you knit 2 together here, and then repeat that on the other side. It's just the rate of decrease that you'll find is a little different than some other patterns. Now that we finished our first decrease row, we're going to knit 3 rounds, then we'll work another decrease, and we'll continue doing that until we get right to the tip. Coming up on the end, I still have a few stitches left. I need to do 1 more decrease round to get rid of these last few, and I'll have 8 stitches left when I'm done. So knit 1, SSK, knit 2 together, and knit 1. Then I can turn and repeat that on the other side. Knit 1, SSK. Knit 2 together. And knit 1. And now I have 8 stitches left. So I'm going to snip my yarn. I want to leave a tail that I can weave in. And then we're going to wind that through those last few loops. So get a tapestry needle and thread it on there. We want to continue going in the same direction, just like we knit. We're going to keep going around. So that's the last stitch we worked. So we're going to come to this first stitch on here, just like we were still going to knit. We're going to slide those off the knitting needle and onto this tapestry needle and draw that yarn through. I have to get it off that needle. There we go. And then we're going to have to slide these stitches all the way to the other end. Turn it. And repeat that process, slipping them from the knitting needle to the tapestry needle. Pulling it through. I like to put my hand up in there to make sure I can look at that. And at this point, I like to start pulling it tight, but very carefully to make sure everything looks good. And then I go through some of those stitches again, just to really make sure everything is secure. Just loop back around one more time. Then if something is sticking out, I can sort of use my needle to pull it down into place if I have to. Give that another good tug. And that looks good. We're all closed up. So I will put that right to the inside, use my hand to draw that needle through. Then I just have to weave in the ends, take out all my stitch markers, and wash and block this sock. Now that you've finished your first sock, it's time to cast on sock number 2. And while you're working on that, let's chat about other things that you need to know about socks, specifically sock yarn, what to look for in a good sock yarn. There's actually a few different principles to finding a great sock yarn. Some yarns that are labeled sock yarns aren't so great for socks, and others might not even be labeled as sock yarn, but they're really great for knitting socks. So we're going to go over all of those guidelines in this video right here. So cast on for that second sock, click right there, and let's chat about sock yarns. I'll see you in the next video.